Hello, welcome to another edition of Get Hired. And today we have Gina Miller from the Mitchell Communications Group with us. And she is going to be talking about what your options are if something has happened and you need to make a career change midlife or mid-career. And she has a whole presentation, so I'm just going to let her take it away.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm very excited to be here today to talk about this particular topic. It is one that is near and dear to my heart. And as we think about finding ourselves between jobs or maybe in a job that just isn't good for us, we sometimes hesitate to think of what might be ahead. But the transition really is something that doesn't have to be as cumbersome and painful as we might think it has to be. So I want you to think just for a second, you know, when we're at work, we spend a lot of energy and time investing in the opinions other people may have of us, right? How our work is perceived, the images that we create for ourselves. And sometimes those opinions are formed in a millisecond and they're kind of sticky. Michael Watkins reminds us that it doesn't always change that easily, right? And he has a really great book when we do land that job and we need to set our first 90 days up for success. Highly recommend it, but we got to get the job first, right? So let's look today at some very specific things that can help us in that transitionary period. First, we're going to talk about the transition itself. The reality is it's a change, and change for a lot of people is emotional. And it requires us to let go of something and embrace something new. Sometimes it's putting a new vision in place. Sometimes it's managing some of the rejection and changing and shifting along the way, but it's a process. And we'll talk about that. In the second module today, I want to talk about the actual strategy. And this is where we'll spend most of our time as we're thinking about the transition from one position to something new or to our new position. Having an actual strategy or a plan in place, having some tools in our toolbox makes the process much more enjoyable. And so we'll talk about what those things are. And then we're going to spend just a little millisecond at the end and talk about evaluation. Sometimes as we go through this transitionary process, we really fail to understand that we may be doing something repeatedly wrong along the way. How do we ask for and obtain feedback in a way that helps us shift and change that transition to be a little bit more successful? And then I'm going to save some time at the end, hopefully, maybe about 10 minutes or so for you to ask some questions. Kelly will help us out with that. I'm not sure if we'll use a chat or we'll come off mute, but we'll have an opportunity to kind of talk through some of those. And so if you have questions along the way, jot them down. So let's get started on making this transition. You know, whether you're embracing this as an opportunity or you're still thinking of it as a curse, that you've done something wrong and maybe you've had an involuntary displacement. You're amongst millions right now, thank you, COVID. Or maybe it's been voluntary and it was just, you know, you're looking for that change. The end goal is the same. You're looking for that new job, that second next step in your career. And whether we have that positive outlook or not, we need to see this as the opportunity. As somebody who's gone through both a voluntary displacement and an involuntary displacement, I can relate to both walks and can tell you that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. But understand that that light isn't a light switch. It's more like a sunrise or a sunset. It's very progressive and sometimes it's slow coming. But we've got to understand the current environment that we're in. And the reality is, let's take a second to just talk COVID, right? It's a new day and it's a new way. And some of the facts that are in our environment right now is that 42% of the individuals that have been displaced will not return to the same job. Something has changed, the industry is different, something in the scope of that work will be different. And of the 10 people for every 10 displaced, there's only been 3 new jobs created today. Now that might not be a very positive looking light, but the reality is that is slowly improving as the economy comes back online. Consumers have changed, employees have changed, and they have different expectations for their employer. We have all of a sudden a resurgence in diversity and equality and equity and inclusion. There's a lot of changes that are all happening at the same time right now. And we've got to find that new normal. But we can't sit back and just wait for it to come. We've got to realize that it's a progressive, slow process, and we've got to embrace it step by step. Understand the impact to your industry. That's our second bullet on the slide. Some industries actually are thriving amid COVID. They're growing very unexpectedly. Others are reducing and changing. Where's yours? Do you, if we look down to that last bullet, are you in a situation where your industry has changed enough that you really kind of need to reinvent yourself? You need to look at transferable skills. You need to maybe use different keywords and phrases that translate and mean something to a different industry as you look at jumping ships. And then look at the competitive job market. Jobs are out there. People are being hired every day. What are they doing? Well, they know where the jobs are. They're looking in the right places. And they very much educated themselves on what is happening, what is in the news, what are the companies that they're watching, and how are those companies being relevant to the candidates today. Let's take just a second and kind of get a little physics involved in our discussion today. So how does change really happen? If you're looking and understanding your current status, this is where you are today, and you've clearly defined where you want to be, that's that desired state. We have to move, right? We've got to shift that dotted line. And physics tells us that if the restraining forces are greater than the driving forces, that change is never going to happen. You're not going to secure the job. You're not going to have that new vision. You're not going to move. You're going to stay in your current state, whether that's unhappy in a current job or maybe in a displacement position. So really understand, what are the things you feel that you have to overcome to make movement? So maybe one of those examples might be that there's not a lot of jobs available. Okay, that could be a restraining force, right? So the driving force that you have control over is differentiating your job skills. Starting to think differently about how you stand out in the pack. How are you different than all the other candidates? And can you clearly articulate why somebody needs to hire you instead of the other 20 applicants for that particular job? Maybe another restraining force is that your skills are a little outdated. You've sat in the same job for a long time and you're starting to look and it's kind of changed out there and the market is a little different. Well, the driving force to that restraining force might be find out what, maybe go get a fresh certification, get up to date on the new terminologies and the programs and the technology that's being used. If you've been displaced, you might have a little time on your hands to be able to look at, there's a ton of free resources that are out there to help you build those skills and better yet, empower you to articulate those to push back on those types of restraining forces. When you look at this, it's really a process, right? So you have to let go of something. Let's just use the displacement model again, because that's kind of where a lot of folks seem to be falling these days. You know, you loved your job. You loved the people you were with. It was just a dream job. And all of a sudden you find yourself, you know, on the street. You're out in the market, right? That's hard to let go because it was so good and you liked it. So as the importance goes up, it's harder to let go of that past and the things that you've got to let go of in order to embrace that new beginning. So sometimes you see this idea of hanging out in the neutral zone. That's where you're figuring things out. And the reality is you don't want to be there very long. You want to figure out, get a vision, know what you're working toward, and start to work into those places. So when you look at this idea of understanding change is actually pretty emotional. We go through 4 primary stages. And anytime we're letting go of something old and we're embracing something new, we go through these 4 stages. Sometimes we go quicker than others. Sometimes we take a step back, but we might feel things like shock and denial, anger, maybe even fear or grief that we've got to let go of something. Maybe we're in a job and we've got a new manager and man, it's just not like it was. It's just, this manager isn't like it was. It's not the same. We also then go into kind of a little feeling of resistance, and we feel frustrated, or we feel a loss of control as things around us are changing and we don't have control of them. And so we can feel some of those emotions. But as we start to come out of that neutral zone, we go into a phase called exploration, where we start to get a little curious and we ask questions and we take risk and we become a little more creative, and all of a sudden we find ourselves with a clear vision of where we're going, and we can commit to that. And we've got purpose again, and we feel that we can manage the stresses, and we start to even motivate the people around us that might still be going through some of those same changes. But what's really interesting is we look at this and we go through these different phases. We definitely need different things along the way. So for example, when we're in that denial phase, we don't want to be there very long, but we really just need to know it's okay to be ticked off, right? It's okay to be frustrated, and we need that validation, but it's not healthy to stay there long. We want to move into the idea of gaining some understanding, where we get input and communication and information on what is around us and what our opportunities might be. This third block of when we're exploring, sometimes we need a persuasion. We need a little kick or a little push to maybe change industries. So we may be exiting one industry and decide we want to try something else. Maybe we want to start our own business, or maybe be a consultant, or do something totally different. That's scary. But as we explore those options, they become very real and normalized to us. And then lastly, the idea that we start to align to our new normal. That's kind of a cheerleader or a coach, and we become forward thinking. We see it at that point. So my point with all of this is understand it's okay to feel the emotions of change. And I want to emphasize that although you may move through this process and have a clear vision, but you don't maybe secure the job right away, your spouse or your significant other might be over there still in a loss of control and stress and confusion, and that can create tensions at home. So understand that the people around us might be moving through the process differently than we do. So just to remember, visualize that new beginning. It helps us to get there sooner, but we've got to do a little homework to understand it along the way. So now that we've kind of understood that this transition is a process and that we've got to let go of something old and we've got to embrace something new, let's look at the idea of a strategy. And this is where we're going to spend quite a bit of our time together today. There's a lot of words on this slide, and we're going to kind of come back to this slide periodically, but I'm going to walk through each of these bullets and just kind of talk through. I want you to think about this as the tools that I'd really encourage you to put into your toolkit. As I've spent 30 years working with folks on this particular topic of job searches and strategies, one of the things that I see commonly happen is folks get and they recreate the wheel. They spend a lot of time spinning. They don't really start with a strong foundation. They just go and start looking for jobs. And the reality is, if you just take a little time, dedicate some time to yourself, refresh, and then figure out your toolkit and what you need to put in it to be successful, a few of these items I'd highly recommend. Number one is, if you still have access to old work, if you've been displaced, or if you're just starting to kind of think about changing careers, make an inventory of your successes. What are your work that you've done? Portfolio is hugely important. One of the most important things in your portfolio are all your past evaluations. Those are often really great summaries, and they can show you things that you've been successful at. They can also show you patterns and where you've received feedback on things that you might want to spend a little time correcting and working on before you move to your next job, or to help you be a more qualified candidate for those positions. But think about your work. Your professional email address and signature. You know, although your floral background on your email is really awesome, it might not be the professional thing that somebody is looking for. Or maybe a scripture or something that's meaningful quote at the bottom. be careful with those types of things, that you want something that's going to resonate with the job and the people that are connecting with you, but you don't want anything that might be offsetting or in a way differentiate you negatively. Keeping things professional. Believe it or not, I had an application who had the email hoochiemama@hotmail.com. Needless to say, I didn't really look too far on that resume. Just be sure that you have something. And if you're still one of the single people in the world that's using AOL.com for your email, it's time to get up to speed with some more current platforms. So be aware that you've got a Gmail, that it's relevant, it's your name, or it's something easy to remember. Professional voicemail greeting. Remember, we're in the COVID world. There's an emphasis on 2-dimensional versus 3-dimensional. We used to do a lot of things face to face. And when we think about those first impressions, what used to be is, you know, the posture and the suit and, you know, all of these things that help to create that first impression. But actually your voicemail, a phone interview, are probably where you're going to land in the early stages of your search. And I want you to think about what I call the 4 Ps. And it is controlling your vocal quality. Pitch. Women, we tend to have a higher screechy voice. Lower that. Keep that in a range that is easy on the ears and it's not screechy, that our laugh isn't you know, an unpleasant cackle. We also want to be sure that you project. That's if you've got a naturally soft-spoken voice, you want to bring that out just a little bit. And if you're more like me, who has more of a soccer mom voice that could clear a room in a single shout, I need to be the one to pull it back just a little bit. Pace also is something to be aware. And I know we're talking even as something as simple as your voicemail. Having a calming pace that doesn't seem rushed or stressed can really help you be received in a way that is pleasant to the ear on the other end. And the last P is passion. Folks, as you go through the job search, you have got to show excitement. If you aren't excited about your skills and your opportunities, I promise you, no one will be more excited than you are, with the exception of maybe your mother. So keep these things in mind, that you show that energy and that enthusiasm, even if it has to be masked or mustered up. And as I call it in the industry, you manufacture a little magic on that given day. Be sure that you've got some energy and excitement in your voice. So when we come back, the other thing on our list is an engaging LinkedIn profile. The reality is, folks, that's where it's happening. Whether you are into that social platform or not, if you're looking for any level of professional position, the recruiting is happening on LinkedIn. And even if the recruiters aren't on LinkedIn, what they're going to do is they're going to look at your LinkedIn, or they're going to see if you're there. Your LinkedIn profile is critical. It needs to align with your resume. It doesn't need to be a regurgitation of it, but it needs to show some creativity and make the $50 investment for an awesome headshot. We really don't want to see you in the lake with a beer in your hands as your reflection of, you know, that was a really good weekend, but it's not exactly what LinkedIn is all about. Also be sure that in your LinkedIn profile, you're active, that you're following things that are, or organizations and associations that are affiliated with your industry. You know what's happening in your industry. Be sure that you're posting and commenting on people who say something that intrigues you. And realize LinkedIn can also be a valuable network tool. As you see somebody you don't know post something that's engaging, and you actually reach out to them to say, I really appreciated your post. That's how networking starts, and LinkedIn is the platform of choice. Next on your job search toolkit, you need to have 10 or 20 really awesome success stories. These are things that you're proud of, that you can talk about in an interview. The trend right now is behavioral interviewing, where you really have an opportunity to show how you did something in the past as a testimonial to how you'd be successful doing it for that company in the future. And really what it is it is storytelling. And those of you who are not, you just say, yeah, I've done that in the past, it was really awesome. That transition to be able to put it into a model like STAR, which is situation, Tell me about what was happening in this particular circumstance that you were going to have to manage. What was the task? And task is all about challenge. So we had this, what we had to do is we had a supply chain shortage. And my action was what you actually did to fix or address the task at hand. And then, of course, the R is the result. What happened? There's another model called SHARE. You can Google it. Both of these models are a quick Google away from your fingertips. They're all over the place. SHARE is situation, hindrance, action, result, and the E is pretty awesome because it's about evaluation. And as you share that example to the interviewer, you find you have this opportunity to say, gosh, you know what? And as the result, it was a complete and total train wreck. But what I learned was, and that can be very powerful to an interviewer, that you weren't always successful, but you were a graceful and engaged learner that took that and made something better. You made a rose instead of focusing on the thorns, right? So this is a really great tool. And again, you can find a whole bunch more about this online. So back to our list, the core resume. Some of the best advice I received young in my career was that you didn't just create a resume by jobs. Now, you do that. You want a very customized resume for an application. However, a core resume is for you to think back of all the things you did and what you have done over the years, and you keep a master resume. My resume is 26 pages long. Believe me, again, the only person that wants to read that is my mother, right? But instead of trying to come up with all the things that I could have done that are relevant to a job, I eliminate the things off that resume that aren't relevant. Much easier process. And you don't spend time trying to rack your brain on all the greatness that you've done over the years. A me in 30 seconds. This is basically your elevator pitch. And believe me, you're going to be using it a lot. And it's one of the most uncomfortable things for many people is to talk about themselves. But the reality is, how do you describe yourself in a quick 20 or 30 seconds? Saying something like, in my case, you know, I've had a really great opportunity over the last 20 years in the industry to work in human resources and talent acquisition, and also have the opportunity to be in communication strategy. And those three things combined, blah, 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 right? What is your elevator speech? Write it out, perfect it, practice it, and then make it conversational for people. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about a hot kind of new thing. Years ago, when I first Googled, heard about even an infographic resume, I'm like, well, how cool is that? And when I Googled it, I got maybe 2 or 3. When you Google these today, you'll come up with all kinds of pictorial representations of who you are. I do not recommend that an infographic resume is your main resume, the one that you're going to actually turn in or network with, but it becomes a wonderful tool in the toolbox that you can use as a nudge. Maybe you applied for a job, 2 weeks go by, you haven't really heard anything, and now you send something like this to the recruiter along with your resume and say, hey, I'm just sending you my infographic, just, you know, a different way to look at the information. It lets you also talk about different things. If you look down at the bottom of this particular one, this is my all-time favorite. Don't know Matt Rule from Adam, but I think he's pretty awesome. When you look down at the testimonials, he's pulled people, comments maybe off of his LinkedIn, maybe through just different industries, different levels of people that said really great things about him. And it's just a nice way to differentiate the information and have you stand out in a visual way. So you don't have to just be in creative marketing to do this. The trend right now is anybody can have one of these. Dear friend of mine, a gentleman by the name of Daniel, did a great example recently of a video. These are not hard to do. You can do these through Apple Movie and other apps that are on your phone. You can also hire folks to help you out with this, but Daniel's example here is me in a minute. And he does really cool things on his video, like showing him making dinner and walking and, you know, having his exercise and doing different things that a normal person would do. Very humanizing. The opportunity to say, here's this really great guy. I kind of want to meet him. You know, his resume is decent. Let's bring this guy in for an interview. This can be used not only from a networking capacity, but also can be shared as a resource to pique people's interest and to differentiate you from the pack. And again, they're not that hard to do. A good Google can help your tech skills get up to speed to put one of those together. I think even I could do it. Back to our list. Cover letters and thank you templates. You see template mentioned on the list multiple times. The templates are really important simply because if you have a core for the way that you're going to structure your cover letters and your thank yous, you spend a whole lot less time recreating the wheel. You insert in your thank you, hey, it was great meeting another Chicago Bears fan. Woo, maybe this is our year, right? That kind of ability to personalize, but yet not deviating from a core thank you, saves you a lot of time. I want to talk for a second about cover letters. One of the worst things that you can do for yourself is to write the cover letter with the first paragraph, never start with the word I. But that first paragraph being all about, oh, I'm so excited to find this job. It is my dream job and I can't wait to talk to you about it. Okay, everybody that they read before you said the exact same thing. I recently helped a student get an internship in mathematics, and trust me, that's not my forte, but it doesn't really matter. Her first paragraph is still this idea of being engaging. And I asked her, why are you applying for this job? And she goes, oh my gosh, because I just love math. It's like this perfect blend of art and science. Boom. Paragraph 1 of her cover letter was born. The idea of starting to say math to me is about art and science and the perfect blend to solve problems. Nobody else has said that, and it intrigues the reader to see something different that they haven't seen 27 times before your cover letter. Stand out. Lastly, on this issue is having folders for your job postings. It might seem easy, the first 2 or 3 things that you apply for, to keep them all straight. But if you just keep your desktop, have a folder, what was the job number, what was the title, what was the company, put a copy of the job posting in it, the resume and the cover letter that you used, keep that folder, because then sometimes what happens is they call and you're like, yeah, I applied for that? I don't even remember. The job posting is long since gone, and you find yourself in a situation potentially interviewing for something that you can't really remember applying for. So keep all of that very organized in folders. Networking contact templates. This is just the idea of having, you know, an easy template that you can use to engage a stranger on LinkedIn. Again, more templates. Spreadsheets, let's talk about that for a second. Tracking applications, knowing how long it's been since you talked to a certain recruiter about a certain position. You should be engaging folks on a recurring basis. It also helps you to understand that you maybe had a really great relationship with a recruiter and the job didn't work out for whatever reason, but 2 months later, you kind of want to go back to that recruiter and say, hey, I'm just circling back around. I saw this really awesome article. I know that was something that was intriguing in your company. I thought I'd share it with you and see what you might have available, right? You're kind of giving them a little something. You're re-engaging the door and opening that relationship back up to see if they have anything open for you. Accountability calendar, folks. A job search, we're going to talk in a minute about a job search, needs to be a job. It's not something you do on the side if you're truly serious about it. And having an accountability calendar just means you're putting time on the calendar that says you're going to do certain things. I blocked out 2 hours to work on my me in 30 seconds, right? Or maybe I'm going to put 2 hours on my calendar that's blocked out for me to just do some networking and mess around on LinkedIn, look at other profiles and see if I can't gain some insights for my own. Sometimes when we don't planfully allocate our time, we find that it's spent painting the back bedroom and mowing the yard. So be aware that that time can slip away. And then another important thing in your toolbox is having in your pocket answers to the questions that you hope you are never asked in a job search. You're very fortunate if you're in a displacement situation because of COVID that the dreaded one of why were you displaced, or why was your job eliminated? Some of those are really hard for people to answer. And now you kind of have a get out of jail free card with COVID, right? But still be able to work through the questions you don't want, and then keep track of the ones that you are asked. As you start to go through interviews, keeping those questions at the front of mind, how you answered them, and we'll talk about that in a minute as well. So I want to talk about resumes just for a quick minute. So in the olden days, when I first started working with people, there was pretty much one way you did a resume, and it was chronological. You started with your most recent work, and you went down the list until you felt that you'd given enough experience, sometimes going as far back as you possibly could, right? The day today has changed. And the resumes have a lot more flexibility because the majority of resumes are passed along through networking. The reality is that a functional resume is often easier to read. The idea that you focus your resume not on who you worked for and what your job title was and the 10 things you did while you were in that role, but instead you look at the job from your competencies. And you start to say, hey, I'm bringing 5 amazing skill sets with my talent to this position. Maybe one of those competencies is project management. Maybe one is analysis and problem solution. Maybe one is soft skills communication. Could be a variety of different things. And by the way, a quick Google will tell you resume competencies or skill sets and help you think through what those buckets might be for you. And a functional resume changes the buckets out according to the positions that you might be applying for. A blended resume lets you go chronologically, but if you've spent 20 years with one company, sometimes it's easier to take the functions from that company instead of just going by job title. So you'd say, I've worked at, let's just use Walmart as an example. I've worked at Walmart for 25 years, and these are the titles right there, boom, 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 that I've had. And here's all the different skill sets that I offered Walmart. The other thing about a functional resume is if you've got a big gap and you haven't worked in a while, it lets you take advantage of volunteer time, things that you weren't necessarily compensated for, but that you had some tremendous experience in. And you could take like project management. Maybe you volunteered for a group and you ran maybe you planned a race or some kind of event in the community. That's massive. Even though you weren't on payroll to do it, you still demonstrated the skills, and that format lets you talk about it. Action verbs. Every bullet, and I highly recommend bullets in resumes because we need to make it as easy as possible for the reader, the reviewer, to get through your information. And if they don't see something by halfway down the first page, they typically don't go any further. So what hooks might you have? And the verbs matter. Every bullet should begin with a verb. Avoid things like managed or administered unless you're looking for that type of a role. Those are very overused and they really don't tell you anything. Like created, initiated, drove, those designed, implemented, different words that will help illustrate who you are can matter in a resume. Also, avoid paragraphs and that bio statement at the beginning. People really don't read those anymore. They're looking for your skill set, keywords and phrases, what I call snackable. What can you tell them about yourself quickly? Instead of a bio statement that's a paragraph that like I'm reading War and Peace, instead tell me in what your proficiencies are, keywords and phrases, right there, the top 10 things you bring to the page, and then go down and develop them out. Add a hyperlink to your LinkedIn. A lot of resumes are passed around digitally. Make it really easy to click right into your LinkedIn and see who you are. Qualify and illustrate. This is about metrics. When you look at your resume, I should see the square footage of the warehouse you managed, the number of people you were responsible for, the head count, the percentage of growth you brought from a project, numbers, scope, scale, size. qualify your skills instead of just saying, I managed a team. How big was the team? You know, what kind of team was it? Did you manage a remote workforce? If so, tell me that. Did you train this workforce? That's a much needed skill. Was the workforce cross-functional, dotted line reports? All those things mean things. Proofread the resume. I have seen executive resumes with typos, and it about blows my mind. And the typos sometimes aren't obvious. It's not like I misspelled my last name. However, I might have a long dash and a short dash on my dates. They might be inconsistent. I might have some end marks. Other times I don't use an end mark. I may have things like lead when I meant lead, L-E-D. So watch out, tense of that word can change as you have past tense and present tense. It's a different spelling. And then look for key words. This is probably one of the golden nuggets of our time together today. Keywords that have to do in the job posting should be in your resume. If the job posting talks about collaboration, the word collaboration should be in your resume. If you're applying online, 99% use an HRIS or a human resource information system that screens all the resumes. The computer will never get you to a human if you don't have enough keywords that align to the job posting. So I've had people say, Gina, I don't want them to think I just copied the job posting. And I'm like, why not? That's what they want. They want to see that in the resume. And any of those skills you have, use their words so that it increases the likelihood that your resume will get to human hands. Next, let's look at job search essentials. So this is networking. And we're going to spend a couple of minutes here and then a couple of minutes in our last module, and we'll be ready for some questions. So when you think about networking, take some time and think about the top 50 companies you'd like to work with. And even if you had the top 10 companies, know why you chose those companies. What is it about those companies? And watch them. Set up some Google alerts. Know what's happening in those particular companies. Maybe they're the top target companies in your industry. And maybe they're small mom pop shops that you're just really intrigued by, startups that did something incredible, or nonprofits. List 100 contacts. This might come over time, but who are the influencers that you either are connected to, that you want to reach out to, or you'd like to get connected to, and put a plan together to make those things happen. Mentorships are really powerful during your job search. And sometimes we think, oh, I'm just going to have a mentor that can, help me find a job. And that's great. But there's lots of other mentors that can help you along the way, like a skill-based mentorship. You reach out to somebody because they're a phenomenal public speaker and you want to learn from them. What is it that they do, or what book do they recommend you read, or how they get there? Somebody that's doing your job, that's a situational mentor. You reach out to somebody, if you're thinking about switching industries, maybe you can shadow them for a day, or you can just have lunch with them once a week or so, just to kind of get inside their head and see what they're doing in that particular space that you want to grab onto. Having a peer mentor is another example, just somebody that's swimming in the same boat you're swimming in. If you're displaced, finding someone else that's either been through that struggle or is going through that same process as you are, so you could share your victories and have a shoulder to mourn with it when those things aren't going maybe quite as planned. Networking contact templates, same thing as our templates before. Sometimes you sit and you look at that LinkedIn and you want to reach out to this person, but you're like, geez, I sound kind of creepy. How do they know I'm really not some stalker? Having some comfort in those phrases that you might be using, that's what I mean by templates. And then research skills for target jobs. So when I start to think about a dream job, maybe I'm not quite ready for it, but if I start to look at those job postings that I'm not maybe qualified to apply for yet, how do I do a gap analysis? How do I look at what they're looking for and compare that back to the skills I have and put a plan together to bridge that gap? Is it that I need to pick up a class? The reality is 85% of positions are networking. And so when you find those jobs, you also want to connect to people that might be in that organization or people you're networked to that know people in that organization. And helping to have the skills to make you a qualified candidate certainly helps along the way. The job search structure. This is, I think, the last slide in this section. This is the idea that you have to have a job search job. You know, if you're serious about it, it's an 8-hour-a-day commitment. How do you, I had a candidate that put on dress clothes and went to the library and was there for 6 to 7 hours a day in his job search. And that's what he did. What is your approach to your job search? Setting measurable goals. I've put up here a couple of different examples. But what are you going to do in the hours, on the days, setting the goals, and then putting an allocation of when it might be due. Lastly, I want to emphasize here in the middle, this idea of volunteerism. Some of my more successful candidates take 1 day a week to just volunteer somewhere. And you'd be amazed at how many jobs come out of the volunteerism and how many attitude adjustments come out of volunteering. And working with people that might be in a worse situation than yourself, or people just truly appreciate you. And volunteerism can also be a way to build a new job skill set, that you have an opportunity in a volunteering capacity. Be sure you take time for health and wellness, that you have time for the significant others in your life, the relationships, and that you take time to document. When you walk out of the interview, if it's face-to-face and you're sitting in your car or you shut down your computer, laptop, take some immediate notes. What did you think? What went well? Document your experience. Skill inventory. Remember, this is about transferable skills and acquiring new skills and thinking differently about the skills you have. So as you go through your toolbox, how do you prepare yourself to articulate your skills? If you can't itemize them, it's really hard to pitch those in another environment. Lastly, evaluating success. So this is really simple, and there's some things there on the screen that I won't necessarily spend some time going down the list because we've talked about a few of those already. But requesting the idea of asking for feedback. Most places won't give it for legal reasons, but sometimes you find individuals who will tell you why they went with a different candidate. This is insightful for you. Track your interview questions. I talked about that on that last slide. Consider your answers and rehearse the answers out loud. I know that sounds crazy, but it really does work. Be patient. The quality of your applications versus the quantity of those applications. Prepare for a holiday slowdown, folks. Not a lot happens in the middle of November until the middle of January. And don't be discouraged that you don't get callbacks in that time frame. Everybody's eating cake and celebrating with their families. A lot of job postings are frozen at the new year. So planfully allocate that time. And then understand that you definitely have to have a strategy in place. So let's look at this at this point. We want to go ahead and move into this next slide of summarizing what we've learned. We've covered all those different modules and had a little time to understand it's an emotional process. It takes time and commitment, but in the end, you're going to land on your feet, and the light at the end of the tunnel, I promise, is not a train. So let's go ahead and open that up. Kelly, how would you like to do the question and answers?
Okay, there you are. You can hear me now, yes? Fantastic. We did not have a lot of questions in the chat. I, though, wanted to ask, I'm sure other people have the same question, or would, I'm going to unmute you, Gina. Yeah, there you go. After COVID is over, do you think there will be a rush of different types of jobs, or just same jobs, but very few of them?
Mm-hmm. I think definitely along a lot of the analysts, we've been kind of watching this closely to see what do we forecast is going to be out there. It is just really unprecedented times. It's a very different day. Where this all lands, I think a lot of industries will change. I think there will also be a greater emphasis on the remote workforce. I think that that isn't going to change. Some companies that had requirements to be in person, that's going to change. I think the way we work is going to change more so than the types of jobs that are out there. But if you spend a little time, Kelly, watching the news and watching where are companies growing and which companies are cutting back, there's a lot of writing on the walls. Obviously, hospitality is heavily hit, and retail is going to an e-commerce model in which a lot of brick and mortars are rethinking how they're doing business. The hospitality industry, I know Marriott has had claims that they don't believe they're going to bounce back fully until 2024. So people will travel, but they're going to travel differently. So depending on how quickly these different industries respond, I think the best answer to that question for us who might be looking for positions is you just got to keep your head to the floor and really, or your ear to the floor, and really listen to what trends are you seeing in the industries you're interested in. What are your skill sets aligned? And I want to kind of add on that and also say, don't be afraid to switch industries. This is, a lot of people are doing this. There's a lot of grace given to people that are doing these kinds of shifts, but you have to learn to talk about your skill sets differently.
Right.
So that's an important piece as well.
We did have another question. Someone would love to hear more about networking during COVID, since we're all locked down. Are there networking strategies that work well while we have to be remote?
It kind of depends on what approach you want to take. I'm going to come back to LinkedIn. You know, just being, there's a whole, if you'll watch, LinkedIn has become much more active than it's been in past because people have time. They're reading more. They're posting their ideas and their thought leadership out there more. Number one is be active on whatever platforms you're choosing, such as LinkedIn. Number two, understand how might you be valuable in a two-dimensional world. Okay, so by that I mean, if you're out there reading really cool articles and keeping, you know, your ear to the ground and picking up, you know, maybe there's a good report or an analysis that you saw, and you just came off of an interview a couple of weeks ago in which that was spoken of, drop that article to the interviewee and say nothing about the job, but just to simply say, hey, I came across this. I thought of you in the conversation we had a couple of weeks ago. I thought you might enjoy it. You didn't say, and have you made a decision on the job? That's networking in that you're keeping somebody engaged. And I think the other way to network is to reach out to people that you want to be connected to with purpose. So instead of just saying, gosh, you have a lot of people you're connected to on LinkedIn, what is it about that person that is a draw? Why are they an influencer, and why do you want to try to reach out to them? And saying to something along the lines of, you know, I've noticed you have a significant following. Clearly it's because you've got some really interesting things to say. I really appreciated the comment that you made on the news feed yesterday. Just wanted to reach out to show my appreciation. You mind if I connect with you in the future about this particular topic? You seem very well versed. Okay, that was a wordy answer, but I think you get my point of a two-dimensional, everything is two-dimensional at the moment. But the reality is, you know what? You still can throw a mask on, social distance, and go have a sandwich with a friend, right? How can you still look at some of those real world face-to-face when you need that further support or connection?
And we did have someone who wanted to know what are some good ways to maintain inertia after a period of setbacks or a lack of offers, especially right now. I know several people that have been laid off, and then in their industry, nobody's hiring and they haven't had time to fully reinvent yet. So it's difficult to get into a different mindset. So any tips on that?
Like I said, sometimes it's about manufacturing magic because the well is dry. right?
Mm-hmm.
But you've got to find ways that fill your well outside the job, right? So when I say that this is a full-time job looking for a job, when you get about the 20th thanks but no thanks, and there's no interview, right? There's two things I want to say. Number one, let's address the idea of energy. What energizes you? Is it going for a good run? Is it just having realistic expectations to say, if you're going about this to say, I cannot wait to get my new job next week. I know it's going to be there and I'm going to get it in the next 7 days. You know, it might be, you know, the statistic runs anywhere from the first $10,000 to $15,000 is about a month-long search. So if you're looking for a $100,000 a year job, you might be looking for 10 months. And that's the reality of where, that's not always that. That's an average. Some folks take a little longer. Some folks take a little less. Different jobs. You might change industry, take a lesser position. There's lots of factors of that. But what revives you, number one, as a human being, right? Number two, set realistic expectations. And understand that a thanks but no thanks isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes it's just you're being directed some other way. After you get a series of 4 or 5 closed doors, you got to ask yourself some questions and say, okay, I need to reevaluate. And sometimes the energy comes by finding a new path. Something else that this question kind of is sparked in my thinking is to realize that as you go through that particular job search, and you have some realistic expectations and you go and you understand that this isn't always a short-term process, keeping the vision alive of what you want to do and reevaluating as you have the opportunity to hit those pivotal points. And sometimes after those doors have been closed and you rethink something, you find that there was something there the whole time. You just didn't see it. So keeping those eyes open, I think would be probably 2 things to think about along that question. That was a really good question.
I have one too. If you are laid off during this period and you're drawing unemployment, like many people are, should you wait until, well, how long after things are back to whatever the new normal is going to be?
The new normal.
How long should you wait before trying to jump in and start trying to find something new or even to start working again?
I think, you know, we do have a unique situation that unemployment has an extra stipend with it right now. We don't know how long that might go. But it's a case-by-case basis. For some of us, that still isn't near what we were making, right? And our financial situation doesn't really allow us a lot of downtime. But other people might be positioned better to say, you know what, I'm going to take this downtime and I'm going to really get serious after the first of the year. And they maybe have a severance package, or they maybe have been given some grace. But what I would encourage is not to maybe spend that time on a 3-month vacation, but to look at skill gaps. Maybe that's where you go. And maybe this fall you take a class, or you do something through eCornell or another online credible institution that has a leadership course that's going to help position you and freshen you in that industry that you're thinking of transitioning to. You fill your bucket with knowledge, advance your skills, even though the market isn't happening for you right now. You're still working to better your candidacy come the day you really want to engage, which might be the beginning of the year. So it's really a case-by-case basis. You have to know, number one, your own finances and how long you can float. Number two, where's your reserve? Who's going to help you if for some reason you're not there yet when the well runs a little dry? What resources are available to help you? Because there's a lot of them right now. Educate yourself on them and tap into them. And then lastly, just being aware of what that skill piece might be.
We do have another question. I just keep throwing them at you. I hope that's okay. We had one, somebody is noticing that companies that are interested in this individual are not companies that they would normally be interested in. What would you check out first to make yourself more attractive to a job you are looking for?
so I'm making sure I might understand the question correctly. That could go a couple of different ways. Number one, realize you interview the company as much as they interview you. Because you might have somebody interested in you doesn't mean you take that the first job is really a good fit. And again, that's circumstantial and kind of depends on what the situation is. But know what questions to ask and how to research the company before you ever apply for those jobs, right? And then the second part, it sounded like the question could also be, how do you get a company to look at you? Is that kind of what the question might be asking? I think you're on mute, Kelly.
I am. Oops.
I'm a really good lip reader, but not that good.
I had background noise all of a sudden. I was like, oh, I got to mute again. What would you look at first just to make yourself, what would you put in the things that you're going to give out to make yourself more attractive to the kind of jobs that you are now interested in?
It comes down to skills. It comes down to, again, I guess that's not true. You have to have the skills to do the job. You have to articulate that you have the skills and make that resume very easy, or the networking communications very easy to see you can do the job. The second element, though, is culture. And probably 5 to 7 years ago, culture was the buzzword. It's now engagement. Companies that have engaged environments are also looking for employees that contribute to the culture. So your resumes now include things like, I like to snowboard. Okay, so I'm applying for a coding position, but I have a very small box that says I love culinary arts and I'm a snowboard fanatic, right? Companies are kind of looking for that now because they're looking for these diverse, rich people that are the creme de la creme. And by the way, they can pick the best right now because of the situation that we're in. So how are you marketing yourself as a whole person? So skills first, show you could do the job. Number 2, show you're an interesting person. And that could be like not having the first boring paragraph on a cover letter. Get something exciting. Make them want to meet you because you look like the coolest dude out there, right? How are you marketing yourself as a very interesting person as much as a capable candidate? That's a really good question, whoever asked that.
You have talked a lot about originality, so I take it that's becoming, and I know the culture of the workplace is going to change. Being interesting and being engaging is going to be a lot closer to priority 1 than it ever has been.
It's a new day, folks. The old job search, the old crusty resume that went to 100 different people for the Xerox machine is over. It's about networking. It's about relationships. It's about energy, being exciting, bringing ideas to the table. It's about being different, but yet being able to do the core job very well.
That seems like a good note to end on. So, and we've taken almost a whole hour of your time. Thank you so much, Gina. This has been really, really helpful to all of us.
Good luck, everybody.
Thank you.